Hi, I'm Delara. They told me I was just the artist, the one who floated, the one who never quite measured up. You're just useless, my brother-in-law once said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. Everyone laughed, but when my fiancé walked in, his face turned white. That was the moment everything cracked. My family erased me from photos, denied the money I sent, called me a guest in my own legacy. I sat through dinners where my name was edited out of slideshows, my art claimed by someone else, my voice dismissed like background noise. What were they hiding all those years? And why did they need me to stay small? Let me show you what happened next. The invitation came in like a grocery store receipt, crumpled, rushed, and clearly not meant for someone they'd remembered early. It wasn't even from my parents. It was from Sable. She texted it with a half-hearted, "Hope you can make it," followed by a sparkle emoji. That sparkle always felt like salt. I hesitated before replying, not because I didn't want to see them. It had been over a year since I last came home, but because I knew exactly what walking into that house meant. That I was still the same girl who never quite belonged, still the creative one, the free spirit, the one who draws stuff. I arrived on Friday evening, ahead of the Saturday banquet. Sable picked me up from the station, all done up in her usual blend of curated chaos. Hair perfectly tossed, like she just stepped out of a lifestyle blog, talking fast, like she had 3 deadlines waiting. "Wow," she said, looking me up and down. "You really leaned into the artist in the woods vibe, huh?" "Nice to see you too," I replied, half smiling. In the car, she updated me on everyone's lives like I hadn't once been part of it. Jerome's promotion, Dad's new patio project, Mom's book club. Not once did she ask about my work or how my exhibition in Portland went. "Everyone's excited you're coming," she lied easily. "You're like this little myth now. The family's mystery artist, vanishing most of the time." "That's what Jerome calls you." I swallowed the sting. Jerome always had a way with nicknames. Last Thanksgiving, he'd referred to me as the recession-proof freelancer. He thought he was being funny. The next morning, we gathered for brunch at the house. Sable was barking orders at the catering crew, while Jerome hovered near the orange juice pitcher like it held the secrets to life. I poured myself some coffee, trying to disappear into the background, when he spotted me. "Delara," he said, voice too loud. "It's okay, not everyone needs a career. Some people are just background." He chuckled and looked around, as if seeking validation. I looked at him, calm and quiet. Good thing backgrounds are what make the foreground visible. He blinked, just blinked, didn't say anything else. I didn't wait for applause. The rest of the brunch blurred into awkward laughter, snippets of conversations about vacation homes, college funds, and Roth IRAs. I nodded where appropriate, smiled when expected, but inside, something burned. Later that evening, the anniversary banquet began. The venue was as grand as I remembered from Sable's engagement party years ago. String lights overhead, white tablecloths, curated playlists. I walked in alone. Calum wouldn't arrive until tomorrow. At the welcome desk, I looked for my name on the seating chart. It wasn't there. Not under D, not under L. I asked the hostess. She checked her iPad and smiled politely. "Ah, there's a spot back here," she said, guiding me toward the far corner, where a table sat close to the catering staff's entrance, next to the trays of dinner rolls and empty pitchers. The table wasn't numbered. It wasn't even fully set. I sat down. Sable walked by moments later, holding a flute of champagne and wearing the smile of someone who just got promoted in a company she owned. "Oops," she whispered, leaning in. "Admin error. I mean, they assumed you weren't coming." "No worries," I replied. "They've made bigger errors before." She didn't laugh, just smiled tight and walked off to greet her next important guest. I sat there, my linen napkin barely unfolded, as the evening unfolded without me. I watched Dad give a speech about building legacies, saw Mom wipe away tears when Wendell surprised her with a photo montage, I noticed how every shot of the family seemed to end just before I would have walked into frame. No one came to check on me. No one noticed I wasn't at the head tables. Not even Sable. I sipped my water and listened to the silverware clinking against china plates. Maya Angelou once said, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." But this wasn't agony. This was familiar. This was rehearsed. As I sat next to the service table, watching the laughter and speeches from afar, I realized something. This wasn't an accident. The clinking of silverware and the faint hum of string music blurred together as the dinner service picked up pace. From where I was seated, at that lonely table near the kitchen doors, I could see everyone basking in the glow of curated nostalgia. Wine glasses half full, laughter too loud for the truth, and a slideshow looping on the projector with filtered family memories, framed in golden light. I picked at the roasted carrots on my plate. No one had said a word to me since I sat down. No one even glanced my way. I was beginning to think this night couldn't get more insulting, but I should have known better. Because then came Jerome. He rose with the confidence of someone used to being listened to. A folded piece of paper in one hand, wine glass in the other. The room quieted as he tapped the rim twice. 40 years, he began. A milestone, a legacy, a reminder that some people build something that lasts. There were nods, hums of agreement. I tried not to roll my eyes. And while some of us, he continued, pausing dramatically, have chosen to carry the family's legacy forward, others. He looked around, his eyes not so subtly scanning for me. Are just being carried. A few guests chuckled. Most smiled awkwardly. No one looked in my direction, but I felt the heat of being seen in the most humiliating way, without anyone saying my name. I stayed still. My fork froze mid-air. My shoulders tensed but didn't lift. I looked at my hands instead of the room. He moved on, talking about business expansions and their 2 kids' honor rolls, but I was still stuck in that moment. Invisibility is one thing, I thought to myself, but this was discredit with an audience. I reached for my water glass, fingers trembling just enough that I hoped no one noticed. I remembered that Eleanor Roosevelt quote I used to tell myself when things got hard in college. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. That line used to empower me. Tonight, it felt naive. When Jerome sat down, Sable patted his back like he'd just nailed a stand-up set. Dad laughed. Mom raised her glass. I excused myself shortly after. No one stopped me. In the hallway near the coat check, I lingered. I needed air, but not enough to abandon the whole night. I pressed my back against the wall and counted tiles. 1 tile per breath. Eventually, the MC tapped the mic. And now, a special surprise tribute to our loving parents. I stepped back into the ballroom as the lights dimmed and a framed watercolor painting appeared on the easel next to the podium. My eyes locked on it instantly. The slope of the roof, the tiny mailbox I added as a detail, the hint of lavender near the steps. It was my painting, the one I had mailed Mom last fall for her birthday. The caption beneath read, "Our childhood home, gifted by Sable Whitaker." Sable stood beside it with a demure smile. I wanted to honor their love the best way I knew, through art. The crowd clapped. My lungs stalled. That was mine. Every brushstroke, mine. I had wrapped it carefully, with a handwritten note folded into the corner. "Happy birthday, Mom. May these walls always feel like home." And yet, here it was, now credited to the woman who used to ask me if watercolor was even considered real art. I didn't stay. I walked straight past the coat check, out into the cool air, letting the door close behind me. The sound of applause followed me to the parking lot. There's no term, I thought, for grieving something that wasn't taken from your hands, but from your name. Back in the guest room that night, I sat on the edge of the twin bed and stared at the worn floral wallpaper. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I simply sat with the understanding. They'll take whatever I give, as long as it doesn't come with my name attached. I didn't leave because I was broken. I left because I finally knew the game, and I needed to decide if I was still willing to play. I didn't sleep that night. The room smelled faintly of lavender from a sachet Lorraine must have tucked in the closet years ago, back when she still remembered the little things I liked. Now it just felt out of place, like me. The overhead light buzzed softly. I lay on the guest bed, the ceiling fan turning with the kind of rhythm that only made you more aware of your own thoughts. Sometime after 2 a.m, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. It was from Megan, an old friend from college who I hadn't spoken to in at least 4 years. The message just said, "Did you know about this?" Attached was a screenshot from a private alumni group chat. In the image, Sable's name appeared next to a message that read, "Delara was the charity case we all kept around, so Mom could sleep at night." It took me a second to process it. The timestamp was from junior year. I remember that week, I'd canceled my own portfolio review to help Sable rehearse for her business pitch. She had been panicking, her slides were a mess, and no one else would say it out loud. I stayed up with her all night, walked her through it, even stood in the back of the classroom to nod when she looked unsure. And this was what she said behind my back? I read the message again, and then again. My chest tightened, not from shock, but from confirmation. All those years I'd defended her when people said she was calculated, when they said she used everyone around her like props in her brand story. I had laughed it off, said, "She's just driven." No, she was strategic. The worst betrayal isn't from people who hate you. It's from the ones you thought would clap the loudest. By morning, I'd barely dozed. I splashed water on my face, threw on a sweater, and headed downstairs. The kitchen was already buzzing with the sounds of breakfast. Bacon sizzling, coffee percolating, chairs scraping tile. Sable was already there, giving orders. "Mom wants the fruit tray out before the eggs, and someone tell Jerome that the car rental is due by noon." I moved toward the coffee machine and grabbed a mug. As I reached for the creamer, her youngest, Ava, 5 years old and still innocent, looked up at me from the stool. "Mommy says you don't really have a real job," she said, swinging her legs. "What's a fake job, Aunt Dee?" Everyone froze. The sound of the bacon sizzle cut through the air like a blade. I didn't answer. I smiled at Ava, soft and slow, then turned toward the back patio door. I stepped outside and let the door click shut behind me. The air was cool and still. I stood there for a moment, letting my hands rest on the railing. My coffee went untouched. I stared at the garden, the same one Dad used to work in every Sunday, back when he still made jokes about how I couldn't keep a cactus alive. When you've been invisible long enough, even toddlers are taught where not to look. It wasn't Ava's fault. She was repeating what she'd heard. At 5, you're just trying to make sense of what adults say when they think you're coloring. I stayed outside until the plates were cleared and the house started to quiet again. When I came back in, no one asked where I'd gone. No one noticed the untouched mug sitting on the table. I went back to the guest room and closed the door. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I opened my laptop and stared at a blank document. There was nothing left to prove to them. I realized then, it wasn't just neglect. It was a legacy, and legacies don't change unless someone dares to break them. The morning after the banquet was unnaturally bright, as if the sun was mocking me. I woke up earlier than I wanted to, too restless to keep my eyes closed. From my spot on the guest bed, I could already hear dishes clinking and Lorraine humming along to some 70s radio station. Life had resumed in that house like nothing had been off. I slipped into jeans and a loose sweater, tied my hair back, and wandered toward the kitchen, thinking maybe some movement would shake the residue of last night off my skin. I didn't say much, just offered to help clear the tables and box up the leftover desserts. As I reached for the stack of photo montages printed for guests, something Sable had commissioned apparently, I noticed something strange. I held one up and flipped through the stack. Group shots from holidays, vacations, birthdays, photos spanning decades. But with each image, something gnawed at me. I wasn't in any of them. At first, I thought maybe I'd just missed the years I was away. But then I spotted one from my high school graduation. I remembered that day perfectly. Sable had been late. Jerome hadn't shown up yet in our lives, and I had worn a crooked cap. In the photo on the montage, I wasn't there. It was cropped just so, as if someone had snipped me out with a pair of scissors. What remained was a smiling Sable with Mom and Dad on either side, holding my bouquet. My stomach turned. Sable breezed past me with a carton of orange juice. She caught my expression and tilted her head. "What's up?" I held up the photo, letting it speak for me. "Oh," she said, barely pausing. The print guy must have just chosen the most flattering shots. No apology, no surprise. Just that same smooth dismissal I'd come to know like the back of my hand. The implication was clear. My absence made the picture better. I said nothing, but inside, I felt something shift. Even history gets edited when it makes someone uncomfortable. I folded the montage in half, dropped it onto the counter, and left the room. The afternoon passed in a blur of conversations I wasn't invited into. I kept to myself, helped stack chairs, then joined everyone outside for a casual lunch under the patio umbrellas. That's when it got worse. Wendell sat at the head of the table, talking with that loud cheerfulness he reserved for guests and public settings. Say what you will, but Sable's always stepped up when this family needed it. Financially, emotionally, she's been the glue. Lorraine smiled. Sable beamed like someone just handed her a fresh crown. I cleared my throat. Actually, I sent monthly checks during the housing crash, helped cover the second mortgage for almost a year. The table fell silent. Wendell frowned. You did? I nodded. Direct deposit. Same day every month. Lorraine blinked, then offered a smile so thin I could have sliced through it. Sweetheart, we never asked for that. You insisted. You were insistent. Right, I said, my voice dry. Insistent. No thank you. No acknowledgement. Just revisionist history served cold on a picnic table. I pushed my chair back and stood up. Excuse me. Back in the guest room, I opened my laptop, logged into my old banking app, and began scrolling. The numbers were there, clear as ever, one deposit after another, always the same amount, always labeled Mom and Dad, home. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like a metronome. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't clinging to a false memory. I had receipts. When you aren't worth remembering, your contributions become fiction. And as I stared at my own records, a question rose like a tide inside me, one I hadn't let myself ask until now. I may not be the chosen daughter, but what happens when the forgotten one starts remembering? The house had quieted by late afternoon, everyone scattered into their usual patterns of avoidance. Sable had gone out for a spa appointment. She insisted she couldn't reschedule, while Lorraine curled up in the den with a magazine, her reading glasses slipping halfway down her nose. I was grateful for the silence, finally. Back in the guest room, I pulled the door shut behind me, locked it, and sat at the old desk pushed against the wall. I opened my laptop and began searching. Not for old photos or comforting memories. No, I was looking for proof. Concrete, black and white truth that couldn't be massaged away by charm or denial. A few clicks in, I found it. Buried in a string of old email threads was the refinancing agreement from 6 years ago, the one Wendell had asked me to co-sign when their credit didn't cut it. I remembered it now, how he'd said, "It's just a formality, sweetheart. We need a fresh signature for the bank to ease the numbers." I had nodded, trusting like a daughter was supposed to. There it was. A scanned PDF, complete with my signature, my legal name, and a clause listing me as co-owner under a tax shelter. My name was on the deed, if only on paper. I printed the document, circled my name with a red pen I found in the drawer, and slid it into a folder labeled Records. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet, but I knew what it meant. Paper doesn't lie. People do. I shut the laptop, took a breath, and stepped out into the backyard. The sky was beginning to shift. that soft California light giving everything a golden tint. I could hear voices from the patio, Wendell laughing too loudly, Lorraine sipping her wine, Sable discussing eucalyptus centerpieces for her next event. And there, standing a little apart from the group, was Calum. He wasn't supposed to arrive until the next day, but there he was, hands in his pockets, wearing that calm, unreadable look he always carried when he was reading a room. As I approached, Sable turned, and I caught it. Just a flicker, a twitch at the corner of her mouth. Surprise, discomfort. Maybe something else. "Delara," she said too brightly, "you didn't tell us he was coming early." "Didn't know he was," I said evenly, stepping beside him. She walked over, her energy switching to performative warmth. "Calum, welcome! It's been so long. You look good. Are you still with that consulting firm?" "I've moved on," he said. "Started my own fund." Sable's smile froze for just a moment. "Of course you did." Later, when the patio began to clear out and people filtered inside, I pulled Calum aside behind the old garden shed. "Be honest," I said. "Have you met Sable before?" He exhaled, slow and measured. "We crossed paths, years ago, at a conference in San Diego. She was interested. I declined. Thought it was better not to mention. Didn't want drama." "You didn't want me to think that it had anything to do with us?" "It doesn't." But it did. Maybe not in the way I feared, but in the way that explained everything. Her disdain, her snide comments, her quiet wars launched over Thanksgiving tables and through birthday card omissions. She wasn't just threatened by me as the odd one out. She was haunted by me as the one who ended up with what she couldn't have. All this time, I'd thought I was paranoid. Turns out, I was simply paying attention. I walked back inside, past the row of family photos, the curated smiles, the staged perfection. I wasn't going to yell, I wasn't going to beg. If silence was their inheritance, maybe it was time I rewrote the will. By early evening, the backyard was prepped again. White folding chairs, buffet tables lined with linen, citronella candles flickering as the sun began to dip behind the neighbor's fence. The casual family dinner had been Sable's idea. "Low-key," she said. "Just something cozy to close out the weekend." Cozy meant curated, controlled. I was helping Lorraine arrange the last batch of cutlery when I heard the gate creak open. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Probably one of the cousins coming back from a cigarette break. But then I saw him. Calum. He stepped onto the patio with his usual unbothered calm, dressed in a charcoal button-down, sleeves rolled just high enough to suggest he hadn't planned on staying long. He wasn't due until tomorrow. We hadn't talked about him showing up tonight. And yet, there he was. Sable's voice, mid-sentence about catering staff placement, cut off sharply. Jerome, mid-pour on a bottle of Pinot, jerked his hand and spilled wine onto the white tablecloth. The stain spread fast. Lorraine was the first to speak. "Oh, you didn't say you were bringing anyone." Her tone dipped. Not rude, just thinner than before. Quaylam smiled with the kind of politeness that left people unsure if they were being greeted or assessed. "Last-minute flight change. Hope it's not an inconvenience." "Of course not," Sable said, turning her voice up a notch too bright. "So good to see you again. It's been, what, a couple years?" Calum nodded. "Just over 3. Her lips thinned. He moved with purpose but no rush, shaking hands, answering questions with just enough warmth to avoid suspicion, but not enough to invite further conversation. I watched him with a kind of detached curiosity. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't said anything out of place, and yet every single person at that table had started shifting in their seats. He didn't have to raise his voice. His presence alone was a mirror, reflecting their fear of exposure. As dinner began, Calum took the seat beside me. Jerome, directly across from him, avoided eye contact. That was new. We were halfway through a dish of grilled chicken and roasted potatoes when Calum leaned forward, speaking casually to no one in particular. "You know, I was reminded of an audit from my firm a few years back. Fascinating case. Internal reports showed discrepancies, some of them buried so well it took us weeks to catch. One guy falsified 4/4 of data. Brilliant on paper, rotten underneath. He didn't look at Jerome. He didn't have to. Jerome's fork clinked against his plate as he missed the bite he was trying to lift. He wiped his mouth with his napkin and excused himself a minute later. After the table had started to buzz again, Calum leaned toward me and whispered, "That man worked under me. He lied. I left quietly. He stayed comfortably. I never forgot." I stared at my wineglass for a long second before responding. "So all this time..." "They wanted you small because they were afraid of who stood beside you," he said, without a hint of hesitation. And just like that, the roles flipped. But I knew better. Wounded egos don't retreat. They retaliate. The brunch was held at the kind of country club where the tablecloths were whiter than the guest list. I wore a navy dress, not too formal, not too casual, the kind you wear when you want to be noticed, but not talked about. Sable had, of course, organized everything. It was her element: name tags, seating charts, a Bloody Mary bar so perfect it could have been ripped from a home design magazine. She fluttered between tables, complimenting earrings, adjusting vases, and letting everyone know, without ever saying it, that she had curated the entire experience. Calum and I arrived just before the first toast. We barely had time to sit when I felt my phone vibrate in my lap. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Subject: Anonymous tip body. Thought you should know. This was forwarded to his partner. Attached was a PDF. I tapped it open. It was a scan of an anonymous email sent to Calum's business partner at his investment firm. The email accused him of misappropriating funds during his tenure as CFO. Worded vaguely but intentionally, full of dog whistle phrases like breach of ethical practice and patterns of financial misdirection. I showed it to him under the table. He read it silently, then slipped his phone back into his jacket. Calm as ever, he leaned toward me. "Truth has a way of aging well," he whispered. "Lies wrinkle quickly." "Do you think it was..." He cut me off with a glance. "Don't need to guess. Only one person in that room knows enough and hates hard enough." I looked over at Jerome. He was laughing at something a cousin said, but his eyes darted sideways, once, then again. And Sable? She didn't look once in our direction. She didn't need to. After brunch, I didn't say a word to her. But the silence between us wasn't empty. It was loaded. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the guest bed scrolling through old cloud backups, photo folders I hadn't touched in years. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I found it. It was an old photo from a leadership conference I'd attended in San Diego during my late 20s. It was the first event where I'd had my artwork featured in a professional gallery as part of a side exhibit. Sable had tagged along, said she needed a weekend to breathe, and that she just wanted to support me. In the background of one photo, blurred but unmistakable, stood Sable and Calum, close, talking, smiling. I stared at the screen for a long time. I walked downstairs, barefoot, and found Calum at the dining room table, laptop open, earbuds dangling from his collar. I held up my phone. Was it just a misunderstanding, or did she want you back then too? He met my eyes without flinching. She didn't just flirt. She tried to come between me and my ex-wife. It's why I left the marriage and the company. I walked away from both. My chest tightened, not from jealousy, but from recognition. She didn't just resent me for existing differently. She resented me for being a reminder of something she couldn't control, of someone she couldn't have. All these years, I thought I was the inconvenience, the burden, the one they didn't know how to fit in. But no, I was something worse in their eyes. I wasn't just the inconvenient sister. I was the living reminder that she'd lost. Dinner that evening was held at the country club's private hall. Sable had reserved it under her name, of course. It was supposed to be intimate. Just family. No frills, no photographers. Just one last gathering to wrap the weekend. Or so she claimed. The room was dressed in candlelight and muted jazz. Every place setting was perfectly aligned. Name cards written in gold calligraphy. Mine read, Delara, Artist. A passive-aggressive upgrade from the nothing I'd been handed the night before. I hadn't told Calum about what I was planning. I didn't need to. We'd exchanged just one look in the car on the way over, and that had been enough. Dinner started stiff. Small talk passed around like dry bread. No one mentioned Jerome's sudden stomach bug that had kept him from brunch. No one asked how Calum and I had spent our afternoon. The silence wasn't awkward. It was strategic. Halfway through the second course, Calum cleared his throat gently and tapped the edge of his water glass. "Before dessert," he said, tone neutral, "there's something I think we should look at together." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a slim manila folder, and placed it on the center of the table. Then he slid a sheet out and turned it toward Jerome. "It's strange what people do when they think no one is watching," Calum said. Not loud, not soft, just undeniable. Jerome's face paled. His fork paused midair. "What's this?" Wendell asked, peering over his glasses. "A formal complaint," Calum answered. "Filed to my business partner, accusing me of fraud. Traced back to this IP address." He pointed to the bottom of the printout. "This one belongs to your work-issued laptop, Jerome. Or has that changed?" Sable stiffened. Lorraine gasped softly. No one spoke. Jerome let out a strained laugh. "That's ridiculous. Anyone could spoof—" "No one spoofed," Calum cut in. "We already verified it with the firm's IT team. I didn't want to embarrass you, but I also won't let this go unanswered." I stood then. Calm. Centered. I brought something too. I walked to the small podium in the corner, opened my bag, and took out a USB drive. "Dad," I said, "you'll want to watch this." Wendell looked confused, but nodded. I walked over to the flat screen at the back of the room, plugged it in, and pressed play. The screen flickered. The video that appeared was grainy, the audio slightly warped, but the voice was clear. Jerome's. "I fudged the numbers," his voice said, laughing. "They won't find it. I buried it deep. No one checks these things if you smile enough in meetings." The room froze. Not even the music dared to continue. Sable's mouth parted slightly. Lorraine's hand clutched her wine glass like it was a lifeline. The video ended. Silence followed. Wendell stood slowly. "I think that's enough for tonight," he said. No one objected. I looked around the table. Eyes dropped. No defenses rose. It was the first time I'd spoken directly into the family's collective face, and the first time they'd had nothing to throw back. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I simply offered the truth and let the silence answer itself. They had built a legacy on silence. But now, their silence had a new name, mine. Mourning brought no redemption, only a quiet too loud to ignore. The kind of silence that doesn't heal, it accuses. Coffee brewed in the kitchen like nothing had happened. I heard clinks of silverware, the soft murmur of Dad and Lorraine exchanging words no one meant. I didn't go down, not right away. Instead, I wandered into the living room and stood in front of the mantel, eyeing the frames Sable had arranged so artfully. Family photos printed for the banquet, some recent, others pulled from storage. All the smiles were curated, all the light intentional. One photo stopped me cold. It was from the family portrait used in the slideshow, the one with everyone lined up in front of the old house, a rare occasion when all of us had actually shown up. I was in it, just barely. Off to the side, not touching anyone, like I'd photobombed my own family. I leaned closer and noticed the tag below the frame. Family friend, D. I stared at the words until they blurred. I walked into the kitchen, the frame still in my hands. Lorraine looked up from her coffee, blinking at me as though I'd just wandered in from a different story. "This?" I said, holding it up. She squinted. What about it? It says family friend. You don't see anything wrong with that? Her expression shifted only slightly, more confusion than guilt. I'm sure it was just a mix-up. You've always preferred being low profile, haven't you? Low profile, not invisible, not forgotten, rewritten. It wasn't a typo, I said quietly. It was the truth, as you wished it had always been. I left the photo on the counter. Later, we all gathered one final time for brunch, before people started heading back to their flights and routines. Sable had arranged for the club to replay the full anniversary slideshow on a mounted screen for those who missed it. This time, the cuts were sharper. My childhood montage? Gone. The clip of Caleb and me toasting together? Trimmed down to a 2-second blink. Nobody commented. Nobody asked. They all clapped at the end like the story they'd just seen was real, like it had always been theirs and never mine. I stood at the edge of the room, watching it all. Their applause, their smug comfort in a version of life where I had never really existed. Then I turned and walked out. Outside, the sun hit the concrete just enough to warm my skin. I leaned against the railing of the patio and breathed in slowly. To watch yourself be erased while standing in the room, that's the kind of magic only families can pull off. No shouting, no door slamming, just a clean cut, so silent, so strategic. You almost didn't feel it until the blood stopped flowing. But what breaks doesn't always bleed. They could pretend I was never part of the story, but they forgot. I still held the pen. The light outside had changed. Softer now, the kind of light that wraps around you like a whisper before dusk. Caleb and I were sitting on the edge of the porch, not speaking much, letting the stillness do most of the talking. We were leaving tomorrow. I hadn't packed yet, but the decision had already packed me. My silence now wasn't weakness. It was a declaration. He reached into his coat pocket and handed me a small, square box. The weight of it felt familiar in my palm, but this wasn't the ring he'd given me when we first got engaged. I knew that immediately. I opened it. Inside was a vintage ring, oval sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds, delicate but undeniably strong. The band had a patina that only time and lineage could shape. This, he said, belonged to my grandmother. My mom kept it after she passed. It almost got pawned by my ex a long time ago. Sable helped her. Paper trail was vague, but my family found out. Quietly took it back. I looked up at him. She tried to steal this? I asked. Not just this, he said, meeting my gaze. She tried to steal the version of me she thought she deserved. I swallowed. There was so much more in that sentence than just history. I want you to have it, he continued, not because it's a symbol from my family, but because you're building your own legacy, one that doesn't need approval to matter. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit like it had waited for me. Later that evening, while folding the last of my clothes, I sat across from him on the bed. The silence between us was comfortable, but something still itched in the back of my mind. You knew, didn't you? I finally said. You knew they were never going to let me belong. Caleb leaned back, resting his hand behind his head. Of course I did, he said, but you're not the kind of woman who listens when she's told something. You only believe it once you see it, I smirked. I waited, he added, because I didn't want you to think I saved you. You saved yourself. I just made sure the door stayed open. There it was, the line between rescue and witness. For so long, I had thought strength was something you displayed with your voice, your fists, your refusal to sit down. But real strength, I realized now, was about letting go of the need to be seen by those who will never look. It was about reclaiming yourself in quiet, ordinary moments. I touched the ring again. Some truths are only useful when you dig them out yourself. We spent the rest of the evening on the back porch, watching the lights in the neighbor's yard flicker on. I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt like someone who had stopped waiting to be called to the table and had started setting her own. I used to think closure came from someone finally apologizing, but maybe it comes when you stop needing them to. The sky was overcast when I opened the blinds. Not quite gloomy, just the kind of gray that made colors look more honest. I stood there for a moment, watching the driveway, the cracked pavement, the hydrangeas Lorraine had planted 2 summers ago. There was nothing poetic about this morning, and yet, I felt more like myself than I had in years. Kaloum was already outside, loading the last of our bags into the trunk. He moved with ease, like a man who had done this before. Left houses, closed chapters. I, on the other hand, moved slower, not out of sadness, but because I was paying attention. The guest room was bare now, just a folded comforter, a dust line where my duffel had sat, and a sketch I had taped inside the closet door. It was a simple pencil drawing of the family house, done from memory, not from a photo. I had added the cracks on the porch steps, the sag of the gutter, the slant of the mailbox. At the bottom, in my handwriting, I was here. That's enough. Lorraine peeked in as I was zipping up my last bag. She hovered in the doorway, fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. "You're headed out early," she said, as if we hadn't discussed this already. I nodded. "Traffic gets ugly if we wait too long." She stepped inside, but only halfway. "Well, safe travels." I met her eyes. "Thanks." She looked like she wanted to say more, but didn't. Instead, she glanced at the bed, then at the window. "This room always stayed the same," she mumbled. "I noticed." A pause. She didn't hug me. I didn't offer. As she turned to leave, I added softly, "Mom, I hope next time it doesn't take this long for someone to notice the empty chair." She hesitated in the hallway, then kept walking. I walked through the house slowly. The walls were dotted with family photos, graduations, barbecues, lake trips, all meticulously framed, carefully hung. And in each one, I searched not for myself, but for the space I knew I had once occupied. Wendell was outside in the garden. He was bent over a bush, trimming with too much focus to pretend he didn't see me approaching. I walked past him on the way to the car. He didn't look up. "Bye, Dad," I said anyway. He cleared his throat, but said nothing. Sable appeared on the porch just as I opened the passenger door. "Heading back?" she asked. I nodded. "Well, safe travels," she said without eye contact. "Thanks." Calum started the engine. I climbed in, shut the door, and watched the house shrink behind us in the side mirror. Inside, I exhaled. Not in relief, not in regret, just in release. "I thought it would feel bigger," I said. "It always does when you're carrying it," Calum replied. We drove in silence for a while, past the same gas stations, the same familiar turns. I leaned my head against the window, watching trees blur into each other. I used to think walking away meant I'd lost, but now I know. Leaving is what you do when you've already won the fight that matters most, the one against silence. And as the driveway faded behind us, I didn't feel empty. I felt whole, finally writing a story where I didn't need to be erased to be at peace. The gallery was quiet, the kind of quiet that came not from emptiness, but from attention. It was the final night of my show, and every wall held a piece of me, painted, sketched, or recorded. My name sat above the entrance in clean, bold lettering. No nicknames, no omissions, just Delara Whitaker. Guests moved through the space slowly, as if afraid to breathe too loud. Some whispered, some stared. A few wiped at their eyes when they thought no one was looking. And in the center of it all, looping on a screen taller than I ever felt allowed to be, was the film. It wasn't flashy, no dramatic music or special effects, just stills and video clips carefully strung together. My artwork, unlabeled in family homes, screenshots of family slideshows with my name missing, voicemails from Sable, clipped and clipped again. Maybe don't make this about you. It's just easier if you're not included. And my voice, steady, unshaking, layered over it all. They told me I was invisible, so I kept the proof. I didn't show it to win. I showed it so I wouldn't forget. I stood in the back corner while the loop played. I didn't cry. I didn't gloat. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was thoughtful. A few seconds of silence. Then, hands met hands in acknowledgement, not celebration. A woman approached me near the Prince of the Garden series. I didn't recognize her. She wore her hair in a tight bun, held a notebook close to her chest. "I'm from the Herald," she said. "I cover artist retrospectives. Can I ask why you chose to include such personal footage?" I smiled. Not politely, honestly. "Because women like me spend our lives being edited," I said. "I chose to narrate my own story before someone else could again." She scribbled something down, then looked at me differently, like I had just shifted the ground beneath her feet. Later that week, back in my studio, a plain envelope showed up in the mailbox. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar. I opened it. "Maybe you were right to leave, but I didn't think you'd ever make anything of yourself without us." No signature, but it didn't need one. I folded the letter once and dropped it into the recycling bin, unread beyond the first line. The story she sent me, I never finished, because I'm too busy writing mine. That evening, I turned off the gallery lights myself, locked the door, slipped my keys into my coat pocket. I stood outside for a moment, looking at the sign again. Not just my name, but my name, bold and whole. I didn't need them to see it anymore. I had seen it for myself. I was never the disappointment. I was the proof they didn't know how to frame.